let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this critical conversation today on the COVID-19 vaccine. My name is Ruti, and I am a Jabdu board member. Jabdu Council is an Oromo-led organization that is being developed to harness political power of Oromos in Minnesota by promoting civic engagement, public service, advocacy, and voting education. The mission of Jabdu, which means strength in Oromifa, aims to organize and promote the strength of the Oromo community politically, socially, and economically, both in Minnesota and in East Africa. So the COVID vaccine is here, and we want to make sure that we are providing information and checking myths regarding the vaccine. The purpose of this session today is to discuss the facts surrounding the vaccine. Our expert panel will share key insight on the importance of the vaccine, and we will also share how COVID has had a disproportionate impact on communities of color and the historical racial trauma in medicine and how it relates to the vaccine. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our expert panels. Adrienne Thornton, who is an RN, and she is a Children's Minnesota infection prevention specialist. She has been in infection prevention for 16 years and a nurse for over 20. And Dr. Galane Gamachisa, who is specializing in functional integrative medicine. And so we are so glad to have both of you here to discuss the COVID-19 vaccine and provide information to the Oromo community and also the Black community in general. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
All right, so let's get started with the questions that we have been provided by the council and also our audience that's joining us today. There is a lot of misinformation being spread about the vaccine. And so we're here today to really set the record straight and provide facts for the community. One myth that we have heard is that COVID-19 vaccine may not be safe because of how fast it was developed. Adrienne, can you shed light on the facts around this statement?
Sure. So the one thing that's true is that the vaccine was developed much quicker than vaccines have been historically. And there are several reasons for that. Vaccines are expensive. They can be time consuming if you don't have the money to produce them and test them. And usually companies have to work for years to recruit people to be in their trials. And so the one thing that's different with the COVID vaccine is that money was not an issue. The federal government said, hey, whatever you need to do the research and get through these 3 trials, we are willing to provide that for you. So money was not an issue. We were able to pay people to really focus only on the vaccine and developing it, day after day after day for months, which is unusual. And you add to that, we had hundreds of thousands of people who volunteered to be in the trial, which is just unheard of. Usually companies have to wait and recruit and try and convince people to participate. And with COVID-19, they didn't. So the time that they would spend recruiting people totally went away because people were volunteering. So you have the resources financially to do it, which means you can do each of the different phases of the trial in the shortest amount of time. And there's no time tied to those trials. What usually takes so long is 1, raising the money, and 2, getting people in the trials. That wasn't an issue. So they had enough people to do each trial, and they had enough money to do each trial. So therefore they were able to get the work done. One thing I want people to know is that coronaviruses themselves are not new. We've been studying them for decades. And the COVID-19 is very similar to the SARS-CoV-2 virus that has been circulating in Middle Eastern countries for a while. We've had a couple of cases in the US, but not that many. But we've been studying coronaviruses for decades. So this is not new science. We were already on the road to figuring out what to do to treat it and combat it. And so because they had the money, the finances, the resources, and the people, they were able to get all of that work done much quicker so that we could have a vaccine available now. And so that is the main reason why the vaccine was developed so quickly, because we didn't have to study the history of it because we already knew the history of the coronavirus. We had enough money and we had plenty of people. And those three things together made it easier for the companies to develop the trials, run people through the trials, get them done, and bring it to market.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much for providing and shedding some light on that statement. And so the funding is here, the volunteers are here. Dr. G, I would love if you can take us through the steps of how a vaccine is developed, tested, and approved as safe and for distribution.
Sure, absolutely. So I agree, Adrian, with everything that you said. It's right on the money. The other thing, I think one of the biggest things is actually this is a testimony to what humanity can achieve when we work together. So that was another big part of the equation, is that there was a lot of information sharing, whereas usually in vaccine development, there are obviously competing companies that are trying to reach the destination first and figure it out first. But with the COVID-19 vaccine, there was incredible amount of information and data sharing among different companies, among, just globally with different nations. So that's something that contributed to how fast the vaccine was developed. There's nothing different about how the COVID-19 vaccine was developed in comparison to how other vaccines are developed. It just happened on an expedited level. So vaccines in general, I'll speak about how they're developed in general, but then there's some specifics to the COVID-19 vaccine that we'll talk about. Did I lose you guys?
No, I can still see and hear you.
Yeah, we can still see
you. Okay, I just lost you on the screen. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second. So in general, so vaccines are, so they're basically kind of like the answers to a test, essentially. That's what vaccines are. They take what's called antigen, or what antigen is basically the piece of a foreign organism or a foreign invader, let's say, that the body recognizes as foreign and then attacks and gets rid of, essentially. That's really simplifying it, oversimplifying, but that's essentially what the immune process is and what a vaccine is aiming to do in the immune process. So the first step to vaccine development is you have to get the antigen. So you have to isolate the antigen, or the thing that our body will recognize as foreign. Once you isolate the antigen, then you have to replicate it. You have to isolate it and purify it down. Make sure that you are getting an appropriate immune response in the body. And then once that has been determined, then you go on to just replicate that to the, that's what ends up getting replicated and being put into the solution, into the vials. So once the vaccine has been identified as far as what will provoke an immune response in the human body, then they go on to testing it. So you've heard, I'm sure there's in passing, in a lot of news segments and articles are talking about the phases of vaccine trials. And so there's 3 phases, and it's all done. It's usually done under the direction of the FDA and seeking FDA approval, but it's really the manufacturers that are doing the trials. So phase 1 is basically what they're doing is they're testing the amount of vaccine, of the dose of the vaccine that is necessary to produce the immune response in an individual. And for that, it's really a small population of people that they use, of healthy individuals, so people with no reported, underlying problems, that they volunteer to be part of this trial, the first part of the trial, and they give them increasing doses of the vaccine to be able to determine what level will cause the appropriate and most robust, without also balancing any kind of side effect or adverse effect. And then once that is determined and been determined to have been safe, then they move into phase 2 of the trial. And so what phase 2 of the trial is it's just a little bit more expanded. What they do is they start including people who have certain underlying illnesses. They also broaden the demographic range of people included in the trial, volunteers included in the trial to have the vaccine tested on them. And so that's phase 2. So typically, once phase 1 has been determined to be safe, then they move on to phase 2 Phase 2 and phase 3 often happen in tandem simultaneously. And what phase 3 is basically, it's really large scale, thousands of individuals who volunteer to have the vaccine. And at that point, they're really looking for any sort of adverse side effects that are going to happen on a population level. So phase 1 and phase 2 are typically happening at the same time. And so once a vaccine has gone through all 3 phases, then what will happen is they'll submit for approval to the FDA for the vaccine to be approved. With the COVID-19 vaccine case, they applied for it to be used as an emergency use authorization. So what that actually means is that the vaccine is not technically approved by the FDA, but it's been shown to be so effective and so helpful that they, it's kind of, it's more of a risk benefit kind of thing, that it's more advantageous and beneficial to allow people who want to take it in the public to be able to take it. So that's what EUA, or emergency use authorization, means. But so that's specific to the COVID-19 vaccine case. Generally speaking, a vaccine will go through all 3 phases of the trial, apply for FDA approval, become approved, and then is open to the public for administration.
Wow, that is a vigorous time of going through phases and needing volunteers to be able to even test all of the vaccines. Thank you for that crucial information. I know it answered questions for me, and I hope it did for our audience as well. When we think about developing and distributing vaccines, there is a lot of historical trauma with medicine, specifically in the Black community when we think about the syphilis study and just ongoing systemic racism in healthcare. And so I truly believe a lot of the concerns that we see and the questions surrounding the development of this vaccine is due to a lot of that racial trauma. So why do you, and this is a question for you both, why do you believe we should trust the COVID-19 vaccines, given our history, given the trauma that we have all experienced, and what makes this different?
So I can go first. With the Tuskegee experiment, it went on for years because there weren't protections in place that benefited human subjects. People could do experiments however they wanted to without anyone questioning what they were doing and how they were doing it. And so because they were truly experimenting on Black men, not giving them the treatment that they knew would cure and or prevent syphilis, and nobody checked, there was no system of checks and balances. The difference is now we have IRB approval, which is Institutional Review Board. Every single drug, every single experiment, every single study that is conducted on human subjects has to get IRB approval. And so if your study includes doing something that is more harmful than beneficial to the human subjects, you can't move forward with that, okay? So it is much safer now. The data that the companies have provided shows the safety is for Pfizer. I think theirs is 94% and Moderna is around 92% safe and effective. And so we have the data to show that. It went through IRB approval. It went through the FDA EUA process. And so there are still issues. Let's be clear. There are still issues in healthcare with racism and Black people not being treated as kindly or benevolent as they should. However, in terms of this vaccine, there are so many protections in place to prevent them from testing on people without it benefiting them that I'm just not concerned. And for me, it's very important because my grandfather reportedly, and I say reportedly because he died before I was born, so I wasn't able to ask him to confirm. And as an infection preventionist, I want to confirm everything, but he was a part of the Tuskegee experiment. And what I've been told by my family is I have Raynaud syndrome, which is a circulatory issue where you have cold hands and cold feet all the time, even in the summertime. I drive around in the summertime with my heat on and my car on my feet because my feet and my hands are always cold. And everyone in my family has it. I have it, my sisters and brothers have it, my cousins have it. And we were told that that's a precursor or a result of our grandfather being involved in the Tuskegee experiments. So even with that knowledge, I have enrolled myself and my daughter, well, she enrolled herself in a phase 3 trial for the AstraZeneca vaccine. Because one of the issues that we've seen historically is Black people don't participate in the trials. And so we don't know how things are going to impact our community because we haven't been a part of the trials. And a really good example is, and I wish I could remember the name of this medication, there was a first-line drug that was commonly used to treat hypertension. And so they gave it to everyone because it was a good drug, reportedly had few side effects, except in Black people, it caused kidney failure. Well, they didn't know that until after they had given it to several hundred thousands of Black people because we were not a part of the clinical trials. And so it's very important, one, that we're part of the trials, but also that we protect ourselves. You know, this vaccine will protect us. We're the ones that are mostly impacted from the COVID disease. We have more hospitalizations, we have more severe illness, we have more deaths. And so this vaccine, if it's going to be equitable, it's going to be equitable for all, but it's going to impact us, our community, more because we're the ones that are more heavily impacted by COVID-19. And so what I can tell you is that the vaccine is safe and it's effective and the data is there. You can see it, it's public, it's hard to understand, but there are ways for you to go through the data and understand it. I love the New York Times because they take really, really difficult subjects and they break it down so that anybody can understand it. I love that newspaper. And so if people really want to understand how the vaccine works and how is it safe and how is it effective and what do the companies do to get approval, I highly recommend they go to the New York Times and just read the articles on their page because they do a really good job of breaking it down and making it easy for anyone to understand.
Thank you so much. Dr. G?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I mean, you hit all the points that it's really that, you know, people of color have been the most affected by COVID-19. And so we have the most to gain from a potential prevention vaccine. So, and I mean, with the rigorous trials that, you know, both vaccines have gone, and even the AstraZeneca one as well. I mean, those are just the 3 that are pertinent to the US, but there are actually, you know, I think about 64 vaccines that are under development right now globally. So, and they're all going under the same level of scrutiny and testing. And so, and we can really say that because of specifically speaking about the COVID-19 vaccine and how it is made and what it is actually, which we can get into the science of that, you know, a little down the road. It really contributes to why, in fact, it is so safe as compared with other vaccines that people are concerned about potentially getting whatever the vaccine is trying to, you know, immunize against, actually contracting that virus, which is not a concern at all with the COVID-19 vaccine. I'm sorry. And so, and you know, really, I think the point that what Adrian said about the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, is really what separates what has been able to take place in the medical community and the exploitation of particularly Black people in this country, and make that something, you know, that's in the past. What we do still see, obviously, and what was a criticism of the phase 1 and phase 2 trials, even with the COVID-19 vaccine, is that, you know, the non-inclusion of people of color, specifically Black and Hispanic people. And so I think the phase 1 and phase 2 trials for both for both BioNTech, which is the Pfizer, and Moderna, is that they were demographically over 90% white. And so that changed, though, with the phase 3 trial, as I mentioned, because, you know, that the phase 3 is what includes thousands of participants and volunteers. And so that did change in phase 3, but that was a heavy criticism for both companies which unfortunately they actually didn't comment on when they were approached and asked about that. But is, you know, if we would know a lot more about how it affects us people of color if you know, we were, and I mean, understandably so. I myself would have my own reservations about you know, being the first in line to sign up for something that is being tested. So I do get that. I don't want to seem sympathetic to that. But it's kind of like a chicken and an egg kind of thing. Is if we aren't getting involved and being part of that development process, then when it does come out and rolls out, we won't know the data on how it affects particularly people who look like us. So, but that's it. I mean, I didn't really add anything new, just really corroborating what Adrian already said.
I think
you did, yeah.
I think both of you answered it in such a powerful way, and to include your own personal experience and professional experience in why you believe we should trust this vaccine, and also acknowledging the racial trauma, I think is going to be so crucial for anyone listening today. So thank you both so much for those powerful answers. And you both alluded to this, but it's really, we've seen a vaccine that was developed by a Black woman, and then we're also seeing more and more Black people and people of color being included in the trials, being first in line to receive the vaccine. And so, like you have both said, if it's for us, if we're part of the process, if we're included, then we know that we can trust it, and that it's something we haven't seen in the past. So thank you both so much. I think that was extremely powerful to discuss. And so now I'd love to go into questions more about the specifics around the vaccine distribution and how it may affect us once it's in our systems and everything. And so once the vaccine is available for larger distribution, and Adrian, this question is for you. How is Minnesota ensuring the vaccine is easily and rapidly accessible, specifically to underserved communities? And I'd love to hear your perspective as well on this, Dr. G.
So right now, the state of Minnesota is trying to figure that out. Our first priority, of course, were our healthcare workers, and then our essential workers, and then our long-term care facilities, because they were heavily impacted as well. And so I think what will eventually happen is that we, as a state, will partner together. So the health department will partner with different organizations in the community to make sure that we get the vaccines where they're needed the most. And so, for instance, we may use a North Point Health and Wellness to target the Minneapolis Black and Brown communities. We may use a Model Cities clinic to also, but they're going to have to partner, because to do mass vaccination in the way we need to do it, the health department will not be able to do it by themselves. It's going to be entirely too much for them to do alone. And so if you have an organization that is in the community and wants to help, check the Minnesota Department of Health website, reach out to them and let them know that you're available, because eventually they will be looking for those community partners to help them. And it may not even be that the community partners help them distribute and administer the vaccines, but maybe a community partner has a space that's large enough for us to do a vaccine clinic there, or maybe they're able to communicate with the different communities and get the word out the way we need to. And so it'll be, how it's going to look is not specified yet, but they will definitely be reaching out to the community for help so that we can ensure that no one is disenfranchised and we get the vaccine to those who need it the most.
Absolutely. And I would like to note, once we do have that information and a way for community partners to access that, we will share that on JubDo's page as well. So look out for that. Dr. G?
So I can't speak specifically to Minnesota, but in general, the rollout of the vaccine, like what Adrian had already mentioned about, once we're out of kind of phase 1 of vaccine rollout, which is, frontline workers, people over 65, in some states it's over 75, and then essential workers, then they'll be rolling it out to people with, and that also includes people with younger people with underlying conditions that are in phase 1. It will move into the later phases, phase 2, phase 3. one of the criticisms that people are probably hearing when you listen to the news is, that the vaccine is not being rolled out quickly enough, efficiently enough. That has a lot to do with the fact that both vaccines, both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, require 2 doses. One is 3 weeks apart, the other is 4 weeks apart. And so part of the reason why, there's a bit of a bottleneck effect going on is that some of the vaccines, about half, I think, were being preserved for people who needed, who were in that phase 1, that category 1, who needed their second dose before moving on to the phase 2 of people, the general population being able to even just get the first dose. It sounds like with the new administration coming in, that's going to change. It sounds like President-elect Biden's actually has spoken on this on 2 different occasions about mobilizing those vaccines that are being held back. I guess it's kind of it makes it sound worse than it is, but being reserved for the people who need their second dose. It's going to be mobilized and be available for phase 2 people to be able to get their first dose. So actually, just listening to NPR today, Pfizer came out with a statement that said they'll be able to produce about 2 billion vaccines this year. That's double than what they expected. So there will not be an issue of running out of vaccines. That's not going to be an issue. It's just a matter of rollout. And so there's been discussion at state level and local levels about how particularly to do that. And it sounds like it's going to be mass vaccine efforts kind of things, the same way that when COVID was, COVID first came out and became an issue about getting testing, how they were doing testing, like drive-through testing, parking lots, things like that. It won't necessarily be drive-through vaccines, but something similar where they have large facilities, whether stadiums, parking lots, et cetera, to be able to do vaccines on that scale. Personnel is a big issue as well. The same people who are qualified to do vaccines are also the same people who are usually the frontline workers who are taking care of people with COVID or testing and that sort of thing. So there's efforts to work on expanding who can give a vaccine. It's a very simple thing to do, but it's, you have to go through training to be able to do that. So that's part of the piece of being able to roll it out. And once all those pieces are in place, then the vaccine will really be available to anyone who's willing to get it.
Absolutely. Thank you both for that insight. And again, for our JubDo members and followers, we'll make sure to have information on when the vaccine is widely available and also access to community partners for more information on getting involved as well. And I'd also like to note we have a couple questions left, but if you are following on Facebook and have questions for our expert panels that we may have not covered just yet, please type those in the comments and we'll make sure to get to those at the end. And so moving on to my next question here for both of you, there has not been a clear understanding just yet of, or maybe there has and we aren't aware of the long-term effects of the vaccine. Could you provide information to alleviate those concerns surrounding long-term effects? And we could start with Dr. G.
Sure, absolutely. So the short answer to that question is we just don't know yet because we only have about 8 or so months of data from when the vaccines first went into trial. And usually vaccines are followed out for years as to determine what any long-term effects are. And so, as of date, there haven't been any serious long-term adverse effects, side effects that have been noted. The side effects, I actually should say adverse effects, that's more appropriate, that have been noted with both vaccines are very typical of vaccines in general, which include like a low-grade fever, which is part of the immune response. That's actually what you want the body to be doing when it's recognizing a foreign invader and creating antibodies to it. So that low-grade fever is one, and then there have been instances of allergy. These have been in people who have had a history of significant allergy to vaccines in the past or to specific substances. So those are really the 2 main adverse events or adverse effects that have been noted with the vaccines. Long-term effects, we just won't know until we follow the vaccines out and follow the people who have been vaccinated out for years. So that's the short answer to that question, is that we just really don't know right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the transparency. Adrian?
Yeah, so I just want to add, like Dr. G said, we don't know because we haven't been using it long enough. What we do know is that people who have had COVID have some extended responses. It's too soon to say if they're long-term effects, but there are people who have had neurological issues related to having COVID. So they continue to have challenges with memory, not being able to remember things, not being able to think clearly.
And this is specifically the disease, right?
Right. Yeah.
You're talking about, yes, COVID,
right.
the disease. Yes.
Yeah, the disease.
Yes.
If people who have had COVID have recovered from it, but they are still experiencing issues after they've recovered from having COVID-19.
Yeah.
And so people who had really severe respiratory disease related to the COVID-19 disease are still having trouble breathing. There are people who can barely get up and down the stairs because of their lung damage from having COVID-19. And so if you look at it from a risk-benefit standpoint, we know that there's the possibility of having long-term health issues after you've had COVID-19, the disease. We have not seen that same thing with the vaccine. And so from a risk-benefit, your biggest risk of having issues is if you get COVID-19. Your biggest benefit if you get the vaccine is that you will have 90 to 94% protection against getting COVID-19, the disease. And so truly, the vaccine benefits you a lot more than the disease will impact you. And so if you look at it that way, hopefully that will help people move closer to getting the vaccine.
Absolutely. Thank you both. And so when thinking about and considering taking the vaccine, what are a few special considerations to deliberate before taking the vaccine? For example, would we still be susceptible to COVID or spreading COVID once we've taken the vaccine? I'll start with Adrian.
Okay, so we don't know if you can spread it or not. And so once you get your vaccine, even after you get your second dose, you still need to wear your mask for until the CDC says to stop. And that's because we don't know if you can still be a carrier. You will not get the disease, you will not get sick from COVID-19, but you can still carry it possibly and transmit it. We just don't know. And so as the phase 3 trials continue, in the phase 2 trials, we hopefully will find out more about that. But until we get at least 70 to 80% of the population vaccinated, we have to err on the side of being more conservative and being more careful. And so once you get the vaccine, the chances of you getting the disease are almost zero. It's not zero. We never say, it'll never happen, but your risk is much, much less once you get the vaccine. However, you might possibly still carry it and or transmit it to others.
I would like to piggyback on that and say that likelihood, it's still a possibility. Absolutely. It's not zero. It's very unlikely though, the way that, viruses work in general, any virus we're talking about, whether it's Hep C, HIV, the coronavirus, it's dependent on the number of the copies of the virus in your body at the time that determines your likelihood to transmit. So you could still be a carrier and not get sick. Because of being immune, though, you would have a far, far less viral load. So you would be a lot less likely to transmit. But we never, like Adrian said, we never say zero. But it's just another reason to consider getting vaccinated, is to make that likelihood very small of potentially infecting loved ones, or by unsafe practices, generally speaking, probably not wearing masks, not washing hands, that sort of thing, not social distancing. So that's, I just wanted to make that point that, because of the nature of how viruses spread and from person to person, and that being dependent on how much viral activity isn't going on in your body, how many copies of the virus you have. Being vaccinated makes that very unlikely to happen, even though it's not a 0%.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you both. I think what we've gained in this conversation is there is a lot of information and evidence that backs the importance of taking the vaccine. And so even though there is a lot of uncertainty and unknown, there seems to be way more benefits in taking the vaccine, being able to protect our family, our community members, the world. And so thank you both so much for sharing insight on the vaccine, the trials, the distribution today. And I'd like to move forward to our questions from our listeners today. And so one of the questions that we have, and Adrian, I know you mentioned you will be sharing your screen for this, is we have a lot of members in Jubdu Council and followers who have family members in Africa. And we want to make sure that they also have information on the vaccine. And so what other vaccines, in addition to Pfizer and Moderna, are being used around the world, specifically in Africa?
So right now, Pfizer and Moderna are the two main ones. There are a couple that I think are one or two that are used and being used in Asia. There are 63, and I think, Dr. G, you mentioned this before. There are 63 in development and about 170, 175 that are in their preclinical phase. So there are lots of vaccines in the development pipeline. In Africa, they are not using a vaccine yet. And I was very glad that you sent me that question because being a typical American, I just figured we got vaccine, the UK got vaccine, everybody got vaccine, right? And that is not the case. Africa has not received any vaccine, and they are not slated to receive vaccine until the first half of 2021, more likely closer to June than anything. And the reason is money. It takes a lot of money to purchase the vaccines. And so countries that have more resources are able to purchase the vaccines. And so what we're seeing is 53% of the vaccines have been purchased by the wealthiest countries. And many of the countries in Africa don't have the funds to purchase the vaccine. They don't have the infrastructure to administer them. With the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, the storage of them is so intense. The Pfizer has to be stored at below 70, and the Moderna has to be at below, I think, 20. And so trying to do that in any of the countries in Africa, store them, get them to people in urban areas and rural areas is just going to be really difficult. And so what they're doing now, they have joined a coalition of countries to try and pull their dollars together to enable them to purchase vaccine for all countries in Africa and to make sure that they have the resources for those countries that don't have the finances to purchase them, to make sure that there are finances available to help them do that. And so, again, I had to research this because, again, I just assumed that everybody had it. And I knew about this organization because of my work, but there is Africa CDC. So it is just like the CDC in America, but it is for Africa. And I know them because I steal a lot of their graphics because they always represent us. And so when I'm looking for graphics with Black and brown faces, I always go to their website because they produce everything in our likeness. And I also was able to find out information about the vaccines there. I found out that AstraZeneca started their trials there, and they're still doing their phase 3 trials in some countries in Africa. So most likely the AstraZeneca vaccine is going to be the first one that they start using in Africa. But I want everyone to see this page. It is amazing. It is just like the CDC in America. You can see the number of cases of COVID-19 on the continent of Africa. And these bubbles are showing you based on the map where you see most of the cases. Now, I will tell you, I wasn't good at geography. I know this is South Africa. Which countries are where, I could not tell you. But if you hover over these and click on them, it'll tell you which country you're looking at. So for instance, that's Tunisia, and it's the northern region, and how many cases they have, how many cases per 100,000 people, how many deaths they're having. And so if you really want to keep up with what's going on in Africa, I recommend you start with Africa CDC, because they have all the information. And I'm not going to go through all the pages, but I will tell you, I jumped down a rabbit hole today, and I think I was on this page for like 2 hours. I mean, they just have a wealth of information. And so I highly recommend people go there. Whenever the vaccine is shipped and starting to be administered in Africa, this is where you're going to find that information. So I will take the screen back. Yeah, so thank you all. Whoever sent that question, thank you, because I'm always wanting to learn more. And like I said, I go to that page all the time. It's still graphics, and I never really paid attention to, oh, did they get vaccine? Because I just assumed they got vaccine. So that was good to know that they haven't received it yet and probably will not get it until later in the year.
Thank you so much. That is new information to me as well. And I think as a follow-up, we'll definitely share the Africa CDC page to our followers so they can stay informed and share information with their family as well. Dr. G, any additional insight to add?
Not additional insight, just more opinion that, I think what really is going to be the bottleneck as far as the vaccine getting to Africa is more infrastructure. I think that it will be an easier lift. It's kind of weird to think this way, but it will be an easier lift to get the finances and the funding available. What will not be easy is to come up with infrastructure to secure the cold chains and keep the vaccine preserved and intact, because that's all that matters. If it's not intact, if it's denatured, the proteins that the vaccine is made of are denatured or inactive, essentially, getting that vaccine doesn't mean a thing. So that's actually the issue with vaccines right now in Africa. Just the regular hepatitis B, the polio vaccine, they all require refrigeration. Nothing to the level of the COVID-19 Pfizer vaccine. That's really, that's hard to keep on a secure cold chain even here in the U.S. With shipping. So I think that if I'm a little bit nervous about how things are going to go and access to it, it's going to be because of infrastructure. So I hope that is hand in hand as far as a discussion with getting the vaccine to Africa, not just the funding for countries to be able to purchase it, but to be able to get it to citizens safely and intact. So it's not new, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's very important. Thank you both so much. And so another question we have here is it safe to take the vaccine during pregnancy? And will children be able to take the vaccine?
So right now, as far as, studies that have been done with pregnant women receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, there are none. Pregnant women knowingly were not enrolled. When I say knowingly, I mean women who knew they were pregnant were not enrolled into the vaccines. There are women who were enrolled into the vaccines as trials as volunteers that became pregnant or who were unknowingly pregnant at the time of the vaccine, who are being followed as to any long-term effects or adverse effects of having received the vaccine. That decision is going to come down to, I think, two things: a detailed discussion between the woman and her OBGYN about specific risks and benefits. But it is, with any decision in life, honestly, a matter of risk versus benefit. So we do know that pregnant women are in a high-risk category for complications from COVID, and that's because pregnancy is a sort of immunocompromised state. More of the immune system and immune function is going toward the pregnancy and carrying the baby in gestation, as opposed to the mother's immune system and protecting her from the virus or any illness, any disease. So pregnancy is considered to be an immunocompromised. It's a little bit of a strong word, but it essentially fits into that category. So that's a high risk as far as getting COVID and having complications of COVID versus, receiving the vaccine. That we don't have anything proven as of yet in the data that's been observed from women who received the vaccine and became pregnant or were pregnant at the time and didn't know it, showing anything adverse. So that's positive. So I think that in general, it's a personal decision. I think it's probably a wise decision, honestly. Just wanting to protect any possibility of getting COVID and becoming extremely ill during pregnancy. Also, what they have seen is that the antibodies that are made after having received the COVID-19 vaccine it's not certain if they cross the placenta, but it has been shown that it does go into breast milk, and that the infant can receive antibodies through breast milk. So there are benefits to receiving the vaccine either in the postpartum state or during pregnancy. But again, it's a decision to discuss, consult with a personal physician about doing.
Thank you. That was a question that came up a lot. Adrienne, any additional information to provide regarding the vaccine while pregnant? And then also the fact that the vaccine is currently not administered to kids under 16, and if there is a vaccine that's in the works to address that group.
Right. So I don't have anything to add to what Dr. G said. She hit all the points I would have hit about pregnant and lactating women. For children, we're hoping to have something available later in 2021. Again, we historically have not had children in the first few phases of trials. And so we didn't have any children in the phase 3 trials for either Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca for that matter. So they will have to do more testing before they use it on younger children. And again, we don't know when that's going to happen, but we're hoping by the mid to late 2021, we'll see those trials come to fruition and complete.
I will add, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I will add that Moderna is working on, they're doing trials on 12 to 17-year-olds now.
Okay. That's really good information to know. I know both the pregnancy questions and also for children were asked a lot among our members and on Facebook as well. We've talked a little bit about this throughout the conversation, but what side effects should people expect when getting the vaccine? And I know we discussed that a lot of it means that our immune system is responding accurately, correctly to the vaccine. But what are some side effects that people can expect?
Just the normal, really, and I say normal with an exclamation point, because these are normal side effects. And so you can have some arm soreness at the site of the injection. You can have some fatigue. Some people reported having nausea. Other people reported having fevers. And for instance, my daughter, again, I told you, she and I are both in the AstraZeneca trial. And I'm pretty sure I got the placebo. I don't know because it's blinded, but I have received both of my injections and I had no side effects whatsoever. And my daughter got her first injection, and several hours later, she was really tired, not feeling well. And then she spiked a fever in the middle of the night. I gave her some Motrin. She was fine the next day. The Motrin wore off and she was tired again, not feeling well. Spiked the fever, gave her some Motrin, she slept it off, and she was fine after that. The next day, she had no side effects. And that's normal. She's 21. She has a very young, very healthy immune system. And so that is the response that you want to get. So I'm pretty sure she got the vaccine and I got the placebo, and she was just fine. And she'll get her second injection this Sunday. And so I'm interested to see how her immune system responds, because what we've seen from the studies is that you have a more robust immune response with the second injection. And so even though she's 21, she still needs her mommy. And so I am guessing that my 21-year-old will be sleeping with me and snuggling with me and asking me to bring her soup and all that fun stuff. So yeah, I will report to you, Rudy, so you can share with your audience how she's doing and how she did with her second injection. But again, all of those side effects are normal. You know, what you don't get is the symptoms of COVID-19 disease. So you will not get the disease from getting the vaccine. You don't lose your taste, you don't lose your smell, you don't have respiratory issues. Those are all associated with getting the COVID-19 disease.
Right.
And so I know a lot of people question, well, can I get COVID from getting the vaccine? And you cannot, because the vaccine does not contain the live virus. It contains the messenger RNA. The messenger RNA carries the message to your immune system that says, hey, when you see these little spike things show up, attack them so that they can't harm this human. Once the message is delivered, the messenger goes away, but the message stays. Your body remembers what it should do, and that's why you get that robust immune response. So yeah, if you get side effects, that is totally normal. It is expected and it is okay.
You've heard it from our experts. It's totally normal. It's our immune system working to protect us. Thank you. I think that's a big concern that we have heard among our followers and members. So I am seeing one more question, and we have about 7 minutes. So if you are on Facebook and still have a question that we haven't answered yet, this is your last chance. But the last question I am seeing right now is, how do we encourage vaccination while also addressing people's concerns? I think we've covered that a lot in our conversation today, and even having this conversation today. But what are some additional ways that you both would encourage vaccination while addressing people's concerns? Dr. G?
Yeah, so this is actually very personal to me. When talks of the vaccine coming out and following the vaccine development, I definitely noticed the quick pace. And so myself, I wouldn't say I fell into the camp of, saying like, I'm definitely getting this vaccine. I more so fell into the camp of, I want to know more about this vaccine. I wasn't against it, but just wanting to know more about it. And I think that's a healthy, logical response to something that's new or something that happens out of the norm or in an unusual way, which, the development of this vaccine was definitely unusual in that it was quick. But we covered why that was and why that's actually okay and expected in this kind of case. So I think, just really kind of just having an honest conversation about whatever the fears or concerns are, and allaying them in a way that, it's normal to have that sort of reaction. It doesn't mean that you should turn and run away from getting the vaccination. And what it means is it should be a prompt to learn more. Ask questions, have a discussion with your own personal provider or, on forums, but stay informed and get all the information to make as educated a decision for yourself as you can. That being said, it's still a personal decision to do so. You can, you have all the facts in front of you and, weigh the risk versus benefits and understand and truly understand what you're getting into with both, either vaccinating or not vaccinating. And really it, being okay with that. There shouldn't be any kind of, vaccine shaming, like, if you're not doing it, that you're a horrible person or something like, there may be other reasons why someone may not be just, comfortable with getting a vaccine that they're not willing to discuss or, and so the more you can be understanding and approach a person from a place of understanding, the more likely they are to eventually come around. That's what I've had in my experience of practicing medicine in general. So that's really, I like to share my own journey as far as, being a little bit skeptical at first to say, like, even as a provider, I'm on the front line and treating people with COVID, I still was like, oh, let's read about this vaccine before we just go ahead and get it. So I think that's normal to do that. And, once you really have all the information and really can understand things from, the risks with both, as I mentioned, the more likely a person is. And I've had this, the conversation with a lot of different people and patients, and they really, what I found is if you have that sort of honest conversation, most people do arrive at the decision of getting the vaccine. They may not be able to get it right now because of not being in the right phase, but they, are open to it and looking forward to getting it. And they arrived at that decision sort of with some help, but on their own, really. They made the decision for themselves, which is always the best way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. G. I always like to acknowledge people's fear, because fear is real and fear can paralyze you. And so it's very important to acknowledge people's fear, to validate it, because they are validated in having those fears. There is nothing wrong with those fears. But to Dr. G's point, you have to do the work of educating yourself. And that includes talking to your healthcare provider. But again, and I tell people to do what I did. I see the scientific studies just because this is what I do every day for my job. But I needed to find a way to understand it in simpler terms. And that's how I ended up on the New York Times. And so do the work yourself of getting the information. Don't get your information from social media unless you're on my social media pages, because I can give information. But other than that, don't let social media be your sole education source. Do the work to go out there and, just Google COVID-19 vaccine side effects. There's tons and tons of information out there. The CDC has a lot of information for the community that is written in a way that anyone can understand. You don't have to be a scientist to understand it. And so do the work to actually make an informed decision. And I always tell people, it's not my job to convince you to change your mind. It's my job to give you the information that you need to make an informed decision, whatever that decision is. I rarely have people not decide to get the vaccine after talking to me, because I'm a pretty convincing person and I don't take no for an answer. But, for instance, my daughter, I wanted her to participate in this trial with me, and she didn't want to. She's like, nope, I'm not going to do it, and I don't want to talk about it. And I said, okay. And then after she heard me speak about it, in forums like this, she came to me and said, well, I signed up for the vaccine trial because I heard you talking. It just makes sense. And I was like, okay, it's the same thing I was saying to you before, but, I had to allow her to come to that decision on her own, and I'm glad she did. But, just make sure you're making an informed decision and not allowing your fears and your apprehension to make those decisions for you. Fear is normal, fear is healthy, it is there, but you should not make decisions based on fear. You should make it based on information.
That's it. That's exactly how we should close, because there's nothing left to say after that. Do not allow your fears to make that decision for you. I think you both were speaking to me personally in answering the question and having reservations about the vaccine. This conversation has been so enlightening, so valuable. Thank you both so much for providing your expertise, your own personal and professional experiences as a part of this discussion on the COVID-19 vaccine. And so once again, I'd love to thank Adrienne and Dr. Galane Gamachisa for just enlightening us today and providing us important insight on the COVID-19 vaccine. We have recorded this conversation, so we will have it posted on the JubDo page. If you have any more questions for JubDo or our panelists, please reach out. We'd love to answer any hesitations that you all have. So thank you so much to you both. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you, Ruthie.
Thank you.
Thank you.